My name's Anne. I got married 6 months ago when I was 26. My husband John is 30 and works in an office. So this story is about when John decided without asking me to let his younger sister, Molly, stay with us in our new house. We spent $45,000 on this house for just the two of us. We'd been planning the house and furniture since we got engaged. When John's stuff arrived, there was so much of it. I was surprised and asked if it would all fit in his space. Then John casually dropped the bomb that Molly was moving in too. I was shocked. Why? I asked. We just got married. But John didn't see the problem. He said Molly's family too, so it's fine. She said she wanted to live in the new house. I objected without any discussion, but John just kept unpacking, ignoring me. Then he suddenly got angry, yelling, "If you don't like it, you can leave. I've already decided Molly's staying, so stop complaining." I wasn't convinced and threatened to call my brother. Scared of my brother's reaction, John changed his mind quickly. "Wait, don't call him. Molly won't stay long. She just needs a place until she finds a job and a house. Can you understand?" I reluctantly agreed. Then I suggested, "Can Molly stay in the guest room?" John hesitated and said, yeah," though he didn't seem sure. I moved Molly's things into the guest room. After a busy day of unpacking, we were almost done. We were having a toast to celebrate when the doorbell rang. It was late, so I wanted to ignore it, but John answered it quickly. I was surprised because I was ready for bed. John called me, "And Molly's here." Irritated, I came back to the living room. "Welcome, Molly. Why are you here so late?" I asked, trying to hide my annoyance. Molly replied, "Can't I come whenever I want?" "Now show me my room, big bro," she said, and John led her to the guest room. Soon Molly complained, "This isn't it." John said, "It's a bigger room, isn't that better?" She searched for another room, saying, "Upstairs, right? This is my room, big bro." I felt uneasy, and when I went upstairs, Molly was claiming my workroom as hers. I couldn't help but raise my voice. "This is my workroom, so it can't be your room," I insisted. John suggested, "Why not? Let's make this Molly's room," but I kept saying no. Then I pointed to the room next to it, intended to be John's hobby room, but he panicked. "Not that room. I've been looking forward to using it. I chose the wallpaper and everything." "No way," I replied. The only option left was the future children's room, currently a guest room. Molly, still unhappy, snapped, "And you're quite insolent, aren't you? Not listening to the head of the household. Quite cheeky for a freeloader who depends on him for meals." I was too tired to argue back, thinking, who's the real freeloader here? As I headed back to the living room, I heard Molly asking, "Hey, big bro, do we have anything to eat?" "I'm hungry." I ignored her and continued celebrating alone in the living room. They were arguing, but I didn't pay much attention until John came over and accused me, saying, "You're always going against me and acting all high and mighty." He grabbed the wine bottle and drank it all, shouting, "If you won't listen to me, then leave. I'm the head of this household, don't underestimate me." Then he left with Molly. Despite the late hour, I decided to call my brother and tell him about Molly. He answered right away, sounding angry. I asked if he was mad and interrupted him during an argument with his wife. He'd apologized, but it seemed their relationship was in trouble. Worried, I offered to come over, but he wanted to be alone. I told him about Molly moving in and the issues with John and her. He was concerned about how I was being treated, but I brushed it off, saying I wouldn't be anyone's servant. We then talked about his problems with his wife, and I was shocked to learn she was having an affair with men from a dating site. He found out because she accidentally sent him a message meant for her lover. John had suspected her infidelity for a while, and once he got proof, he took her phone and sent her back to her parents' house. He plans to visit them tomorrow for a discussion. We ended the call acknowledging that both of us were in tough situations and agreed to catch up again soon. While I was finishing up unpacking, I waited for John and Molly to come back home. They returned late, happily tipsy. As I continued organizing, they approached me and Molly came up with an idea. "Let's turn our bedroom into Molly's room. We can each sleep in our own workrooms. What do you think? It's a good idea, right? Just make sure Ollie's room is cleared out by tomorrow," she said. I wanted to clarify something and asked them, how much will Molly contribute to groceries and household supplies each month? And since she doesn't plan on staying forever, how long does she intend to stay? My husband started to panic at my questions. What? You want money from unemployed Molly? I'll cover it with my salary, so there's no issue, right? Molly chimed in. As for how long I'll stay, until I'm satisfied. My mom's cooking is too old-fashioned for me and I don't like. She's always nagging me to do laundry and cleaning at home. But here, I can do whatever I want without spending a dime. It's the best. If you don't like it, Anne, why don't we move out? I retorted, then let's split the household expenses. I'll work to cover my share. Feel free to use your salary for yourself and Molly, I told them. They seemed pleased with this, although I added, you'll need to take care of your own chores. They didn't seem to be listening, so I left a note to make it clear. The next day, I visited my brother's workplace because I was worried about him. He's the president of a construction company, taking over after our father passed away last year. When I got there, he was surprised to see me. He asked what's up, and I explained what happened the night before, asking if he could hire me at his company. He agreed, saying our secretary is leaving due to her husband's relocation. Then he told me about his situation. I was shocked to hear that his wife was pregnant, but it was clear the child wasn't his. The messages on the phone John had taken from his child revealed conversations, photos, and videos with her lover. They showed that the man was trying to avoid responsibility after learning about the pregnancy. When I asked my brother if he planned to divorce his wife, he said, "It's tough on the kids, but divorce seems like the only solution." So I recommended involving a lawyer for a proper discussion. Then I went home. In my room, I couldn't stop thinking about the texts and pictures my brother showed me of his wife's affair. It was hard to shake them off. The sister-in-law I knew was loving and family-oriented, and I admired her for it. But she had betrayed my brother. It felt like losing a close friend, and tears filled my eyes. Despite this, Molly kept knocking on my door, asking for food. But I was too overwhelmed to argue, so I left her be. Then my husband called, even though he should have been at work. I didn't pick up because I knew what he wanted to discuss, and I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. Shortly after, I received a text from my brother, asking if I could go with him to see a lawyer the next day. I sent back an OK sticker. I must have dozed off. My husband's yelling woke me up. "You didn't even make food for Molly, and you're sleeping? What's up with that?" he shouted. I silently handed him a note and pointed to it for him to read. He then said to Molly, "Let's let her rest today. She seems off. We can talk to her tomorrow once she's feeling better." "I'm not sick. I'm just tired of you guys arguing," I mumbled before falling back asleep. The next morning, without waking my husband, I went to my brother's place. He hadn't slept at all, and his eyes were red. I made breakfast for the kids and drove them to kindergarten. They mentioned Mommy and Daddy fought and Mommy left. Mommy was the bad one. She left us alone at home, and we cried. Daddy got mad. They seemed to think it might be better without their mom since she got angry easily. I reassured them, "If you feel lonely, call Auntie, okay?" They cheered up, saying they might get lonely today. They didn't seem too sad about their mom not being there. After dropping the kids off, I went to the lawyer's office with my brother. The lawyer informed us that there was substantial evidence from pictures, videos, messages, and recorded conversations on my sister-in-law's phone. My brother's main aim was to divorce while retaining parental rights. After he shared his story, I got some advice about my own situation with my husband before my brother dropped me off at home. He was planning to gather the family and break the news about the divorce. "If anything happens, don't hesitate to call. We'll all be there for you," he said somewhat ominously before leaving. When I walked into the living room, the house was a mess. It seemed like they had attempted to make breakfast, with greasy surfaces in the kitchen and dishes left on the table. I sighed at the sight. As I debated whether to clean up, Molly appeared. "Where did you go without making breakfast? John didn't eat anything and left for work. Isn't it your duty as a wife to take care of household chores?" She accused me. I retorted, "I'm not your maid. Weren't you taught to clean up after yourself since you were a child?" Ignoring her insistence that you're the wife, I walked away and headed to my room. When I returned to my room, I found that Molly's belongings had taken over. Confused, I asked her, "Did you go into my room? Your stuff is in there. What's going on?" She replied, "I've always loved your room. It suits my neat and cute style perfectly, don't you think? I moved your things into the guest room." Furious, I hurried to the guest room. My computer and belongings were scattered haphazardly. I felt a surge of anger. It was too much to bear. I felt an intense desire for revenge. I'll never forgive her, I vowed. I decided to wait for my husband John to come home, show him the mess, and ask, "Do you still want to live here with Molly?" I prepared myself for any possible outcome. John arrived home earlier than usual, seemingly after a call from Molly. I heard his heavy footsteps approaching the guest room. As I watched him head straight for the guest room, I was sure he already knew about Molly taking over my room and wouldn't support me. When he opened the door and entered looking furious, Molly was right beside him, wearing a smug smile. "You went against Molly. You're the one at fault here, neglecting to make breakfast. Aren't you my wife? Shouldn't you take care of me? Molly is your sister-in-law. You should look after her and tolerate her." I thought bitterly, so this was how it was going to be. In that moment, any love I had for my husband vanished. He didn't defend me, didn't acknowledge Molly's wrongdoing, or suggest she leave or help with chores, or give me my room back. I told him if you're letting Molly stay, I'll invite my brother over. He's never seen our house. Maybe I should call him now. Despite his usual fear of my brother around Molly, John acted boldly. "Are you sure about that? If you bring him here, I'll kick you out," he threatened confidently. I stood my ground. "Go ahead, try to kick me out. I'll call my mother, brother, and his wife, and let them see the house," I declared. Expecting me to beg or cry at his threat, John snapped back, "Don't you dare call your family. If you're not happy, then leave." Molly joined in, asserting, "This is our home with John. You have no right to bring anyone here. Even if they come, we'll just show them the door." Ignoring their warnings, I grabbed my phone and stated, "I'm calling my brother." Turning to John and Molly, I suggested, "Maybe it's best if we all live separately. We can have our own space and enjoy ourselves without any worries." Molly seemed thrilled at the idea of me leaving, with John agreeing. "That does sound like fun. Perhaps it's time for a divorce." Frustrated, I decided to call my family over. Despite John and Molly's excitement about me leaving, I warned, "You'll regret this decision. I'm calling my family now." I dialed my brother and urged my family to come over as soon as possible. My brother's response was swift and reassuring. "We've been expecting your call. We're already on our way." His foresight touched me deeply. Within about 30 minutes, my family arrived. Molly, who had threatened to kick them out earlier, turned pale at the sight of my brother. "Molly, I thought you were going to show my family the door," I remarked. She could only shake her head in response. Seeing her and John's fear after facing my imposing brother was quite satisfying. Both my brothers have been practicing judo since childhood, and their presence is quite intimidating. Standing over 6 feet tall with a buzz cut, my elder brother used to compete nationally until a knee injury in college. Now, he coaches at a local boys' club. My younger brother is just as formidable, also practicing judo and resembling his older sibling closely. Despite being quite memorable, Molly seemed to have forgotten encountering them at the wedding. "We're getting kicked out by who? Aren't you the ones leaving?" My elder brother laughed, prompting Molly to gather her courage and demand, "My brother is divorcing his useless wife now. Please leave." In response, my younger brother retorted, "You're the ones leaving, right? This is Anne's house, built with her share of our father's inheritance and in her name." Meanwhile, my mother busied herself in the kitchen, tidying up and commenting, "What a mess." She then called out, "Let's not waste time. Get to the point." So my brothers complied, turning to me and instructing, "Another person is coming. Let them in when they arrive," before gesturing for John and Molly to sit down. "We have 2 matters to discuss today. First, we need you to leave," my elder brother told them. When Molly asked if the house belonged to me, John hesitated, saying I was involved in the interior design discussions with the contractors, so I thought it was mine, but maybe not. "But I'm the head of the household, right?" John protested, seemingly under the impression that he owned the house by virtue of being the head of the household, without considering its source of funding. Being the head of the household and being the owner of the house are 2 different things, someone pointed out, leaving John speechless. However, Molly remained defiant, citing residency rights. "I won't leave. I have the right to stay," she declared, glaring at me. "Residency rights don't apply here since you're not paying rent," someone countered, leading John to resist further. "But I'm married to Anne. I can't leave. We can't separate," he insisted. At that moment, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the guests my brothers had mentioned. When I opened the door, my sister-in-law, my elder brother's wife, stood there in tears. Before letting her in, I asked my brother how we should handle their presence. My mother offered to take care of their child upstairs. After settling my mother and welcoming my sister-in-law inside, John was shocked to see her. "How did you find out where we live?" he stammered, acting suspiciously. My elder brother intervened, reminding John of their second matter to discuss. John's face drained of color. "What? It seemed he was unaware of her identity as my brother's wife. Realizing his mistake, he attempted to flee but was frozen in place. "Seems like my wife is pregnant with your child. Did you two plan this?" my brother accused, slamming evidence of the affair onto the table. "Well, what's your next move?" "For me, it's divorce, nothing less," he declared. Fearing the consequences, Molly attempted to retreat upstairs. My younger brother wasted no time in instructing Molly. "We've got a truck loaded with boxes. Start packing your things right now." He then left to fetch the boxes himself. Molly, taken aback, asked, "Am I leaving today?" Upon receiving a stern glare from my brother, she seemed to relent. Meanwhile, my elder brother turned to his wife, commanding, "My wife and John can sort this out first. Sign the divorce papers." He handed her the papers and a pen. Although she hesitated upon seeing that custody was assigned to him instead of her, he dismissed her concerns, stating, "That's what the kids want. Your opinion doesn't matter." With tears in her eyes, she signed the papers. Moved by the scene, I saw the tears welling up in my brother's eyes, realizing the emotional toll it had taken on him. Then it was my turn to decide. "Anne, what are you going to do?" my brother asked. Without hesitation, I declared, "I choose divorce too. I want him out of my house as soon as possible." My husband dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness. "Please, I don't want a divorce. It might not even be my child," he pleaded. However, when my brother revealed that he had undergone surgery to prevent further children, my husband was left speechless. My brother handed me blank divorce papers. "If you want him out right away, why don't you have him sign?" he suggested. Reluctantly, I instructed my husband to sign, which he did. I then presented him with 2 pledge documents prepared by my lawyer. One was for him and the other for Molly, pledging to pay for the damages they caused to the house, totaling roughly $30,000. Additionally, the documents stated that they were never to enter my house again in the future. John glanced at my brother and me, perhaps intending to voice a complaint, but a stern glare from my brother silenced him, and he reluctantly signed the pledge document. His shoulders slumped as he made a feeble attempt to head upstairs to gather his belongings for the move. However, my brother intervened, producing a marriage license. "I got this for you too," he announced, handing it to his wife. Without hesitation, she signed it and urged John to do the same. "You've made a mess of my life, and you can't escape responsibility," she declared with a determined look. John, overwhelmed and tearful, complied, muttering, "Just do whatever you want." Finally, my brother demanded, "You have nothing to say unless I ask, right? Don't you owe me an apology?" John, almost prostrating himself, apologized profusely to my brother. With that settled, we hurriedly packed John's and Molly's belongings into boxes and loaded them onto the awaiting truck, destined for their parents' house. And just like that, my brief married life came to an end. As I contemplated living alone in the now empty house, my mother offered to sell her own house and move in with my younger brother, while my elder brother planned to do the same with his 3 children. It seemed that we were all embarking on a new chapter, albeit in different configurations. My mother and brother have decided to purchase the house from me using the proceeds from selling their own homes. They keep suggesting, "Why not build a new house when we get married again?" But I insist, I'm content with an apartment. We fulfilled the kids' dream of owning a dog, bringing laughter and joy into our lives despite the lingering memories of this house. Meanwhile, my ex-husband reportedly remarried my former sister-in-law 6 months later and now resides with her at his parents' house. He's working tirelessly to pay for the damages to the house, while Molly is treating her new sister-in-law like a maid, causing her to lose her mental stability. Unable to bear seeing her daughter in such a state, Molly's mother kicked her out of the house. Seeking refuge, Molly turned to my ex-husband for help, only to be met with blame. He coldly remarked, "If you hadn't moved in, we'd still be living in that mansion." Left isolated and without support, Molly found herself alone in her troubles.
Hello there. I'm Rosie, a 30-year-old who works as a manager at a local company. I live with my husband, Jake, in a house that I own. It's nothing fancy, just a cozy place we call home. I guess you could say I'm a pretty modest person, not one to make a fuss. I have a lot of patience, which has always been a strength of mine, or so I thought. Jake and I get along really well. He's a great guy, supportive and kind. We've been married for a few years now, and it's been mostly smooth sailing. Well, except for one little, actually, not so little issue. His parents, Robert and Susan. Now don't get me wrong. I understand the importance of family. But Jake's parents, they're a whole different story. They're very direct people, the type who say whatever is on their mind without thinking about how it might affect others. They don't really understand or respect personal space. It all started pretty harmlessly. Robert and Susan would drop by unannounced for breakfast or dinner. I didn't mind initially. After all, they were family. But it quickly turned into a regular thing. They'd come over whenever they felt like it. And because they had a key to our house, they would just walk in, even when we were not expecting them. One day, I was in the bathroom getting ready for work, and suddenly, I heard someone in the house. I peeked out and saw Susan in the kitchen. "Morning, Rosie. Thought I'd surprise you with breakfast," she said cheerfully. I remember forcing a smile and thinking, this is getting a bit much. Jake, bless his heart, tried to talk to them about it. "Mom, Dad, Rosie and I love having you over, but we also need our own space," he said one evening. But it didn't go well. Susan's eyes welled up with tears, and Robert's face turned red. "Are you saying you don't want us in your life?" Susan cried. "After all we've done for you!" Jake was caught off guard. "No, that's not what I meant." And just like that, the conversation ended. They played the victim card so well, Jake didn't stand a chance. I felt for him. He was torn between his parents and our life together. Things escalated from there. It wasn't just meals anymore. They started staying overnight in our guest room, and before we knew it, they were spending days at our place. It felt like we had permanent house guests. I tried talking to Jake again. "Honey, I love your parents, but this is getting out of hand. They're here all the time," I said, hoping he'd understand. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Rosie. I'll try talking to them again." But deep down, I knew it was a lost cause. They had this way of making him feel guilty, and he just couldn't stand up to them. It was a tough spot, and I felt stuck. I loved Jake, but his parents were just too much. Life with Jake's parents dropping in whenever they pleased started to feel like a TV show where the same episode kept replaying. Breakfast turned into lunches, which turned into dinners, and before I knew it, our guest room seemed more theirs than ours. I tried to be understanding, but it was getting harder each day. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of pots and pans clanging in the kitchen. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the clock. It was barely 6:30 a.m. I wandered into the kitchen, still half asleep, and there was Susan, cheerfully making pancakes. "Good morning, Rosie. I thought we'd have a big family breakfast today," she said, not noticing the surprise on my face. I managed a polite smile. "Good morning, Susan. That's nice of you." I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, watching her move around our kitchen like she owned the place. Robert soon joined us, a newspaper under his arm. "Morning, Rosie. Sleep well?" he asked, not waiting for an answer as he got busy with the sports section. I nodded, still trying to wake up. Jake stumbled in a few minutes later, looking as surprised as I felt. "Mom? Dad, what are you doing here so early?" he asked, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "We wanted to surprise you with breakfast," Susan said, flipping a pancake with a flourish. Jake gave me an apologetic look, which I returned with a resigned shrug. After that day, their visits became more frequent. They started leaving personal items in the guest room, which soon looked like their second bedroom. I tried to talk to Jake about it, but he was in a tough spot. "I know it's a lot, Rosie, but they're my parents. What can I do?" he'd say, looking genuinely torn. I nodded, trying to be understanding. "I get it, Jake, but we need our own space too." One evening, I found Susan rearranging our living room. "I thought this would look better over here," she said, pushing the couch to the other side of the room. I couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. "Susan, I appreciate your help, but I liked it the way it was." She looked at me, surprised. "Oh, I just thought it needed a change. But okay, I'll put it back." I watched as she reluctantly moved the couch back, feeling a bit guilty for snapping at her. Things came to a head one night when I came home from work, exhausted, only to find a small gathering in our living room. Robert and Susan had invited some friends over without telling us. "Rosie, dear, we thought we'd have a little get-together. Hope you don't mind," Susan said, handing me a glass of wine. I looked around at the unfamiliar faces in my living room and felt my patience wearing thin. "Actually, Susan, I do mind. Jake and I had plans tonight." The room went silent, and Susan's face fell. "Oh, I didn't realize. We'll wrap this up then." Jake came to my rescue. "Yeah, Mom, we had a quiet evening planned. Maybe check with us next time?" They ended the gathering shortly after, but the damage was done. I felt like a stranger in my own home, and it was clear something had to change. I tried talking to Jake again. "This can't go on, Jake. We need to set some boundaries with your parents." He nodded, looking more determined this time. "You're right, Rosie. I'll talk to them. This is our home, and we should feel comfortable in it." The breaking point came when Jake and I planned a short holiday. We needed a break, a chance to recharge and get away from everything, including the constant presence of his parents in our house. I was really looking forward to it. "We'll be gone for a week, just the two of us. It'll be nice," I said to Jake as we packed our bags. He smiled, wrapping his arm around me. "I can't wait. We need this, Rosie." We informed Robert and Susan about our trip, expecting them to understand. "We're going away for a week. Just wanted to let you guys know," Jake told them over dinner. Susan looked surprised. "A whole week? What about the house? Who will look after it?" I exchanged a glance with Jake. "The house will be fine, Susan. It's just a week." We left for our holiday, and for the first few days, it was bliss. No unexpected visitors, no rearranged furniture, just peace. But our peace was short-lived. On the third day, we received a call from Jake's work. There was an emergency, and they needed him back. Our relaxing getaway was cut short. We were both disappointed, but understood that these things happen. We arrived home 2 days earlier than planned, expecting to walk into an empty house. But what we found was far from it. The moment we opened the door, we were greeted by the sound of laughter and music. There were people in our living room, people we didn't know. "What the?" Jake muttered, looking as confused as I felt. We walked in further, and that's when we saw them. Robert and Susan, in the midst of a group of strangers, having what looked like a party. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of surprise and anger. Susan looked up, her smile fading when she saw us. "Jake, Rosie, you're back early." "Who are these people?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Robert cleared his throat. "Well, we thought since you were away, we'd rent the place out to some friends, just for a few days." I felt my jaw drop. "You did what?" Jake looked like he was about to explode. "You rented out our house? Without even asking us?" Susan wrung her hands. "We thought it would be fine. You were away, and these friends needed a place to stay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had turned our home into a rental property without our permission. The nerve of it all left me speechless. Jake was fuming. "Everyone out. Now," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The strangers gathered their things, murmuring apologies as they left. Robert and Susan stood there, looking guilty but also defiant. "We didn't think it would be a problem," Robert said, trying to justify their actions. "A problem? You crossed a line. This is our home, not a hotel," Jake said, his voice shaking with anger. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and disappointment. This was it. This was the moment when I realized things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and it had to change now. After the house was cleared, Jake and I sat down with his parents. "This can't happen again. You can't just use our house like this," Jake said, trying to remain calm. Susan started crying. "We didn't mean any harm. We just thought—" "No, Mom. There's no excuse for this," Jake interrupted. "We need our privacy. We need you to respect our home." They apologized, promising it would never happen again. But their apologies felt empty, and their promises even more so. I looked at Jake, and I could tell he felt the same way. Exhausted and at my wits' end, I knew we had to do something. The love I felt for Jake propelled me to find a middle ground, a solution that wouldn't tear our family apart. The constant invasions by his parents were suffocating, and it was time to reclaim our space. "We need a break, Jake, and we need to do something about your parents," I said, the determination clear in my voice. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Jake nodded. "You're right. Let's plan a weekend getaway. But first, let's change the locks. They can't keep walking in like they own the place." So, before our much-needed escape, we executed our secret mission. Replacing the locks felt liberating, like we were finally setting boundaries that should have been there all along. With the new locks in place, we packed our bags. Before leaving, I suggested, "Let's turn off our phones. No distractions, no calls, just us." Jake agreed without a second thought, and we left for our weekend retreat, phones off, hoping for a few days of peace. Our weekend was a slice of heaven. We laughed, shared stories, and for a while, the chaos of our life seemed a distant memory. But as we prepared to head back, a nagging sense of uncertainty crept in. On our drive home, we finally turned our phones back on. Almost immediately, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered hesitantly. "This is Officer Daniels. Am I speaking with Mrs. Rosie Thompson?" A stern voice inquired. "Yes, this is she," I replied, my heart starting to race. "I'm calling about an incident at your residence. We have detained several individuals who broke the locks and entered your home." My mouth went dry. "Broke the locks? Entered our home?" "Yes, ma'am. It appears they were trying to gain unauthorized access. We have them at the station." I glanced at Jake, who was listening intently, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. "We'll be home soon, officer. Thank you for letting us know," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. Hanging up, I relayed the information to Jake. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and he let out a long, deep breath. "Who would do that? And why?" I whispered, a sense of dread washing over me. "We'll find out soon enough," Jake replied, his jaw set firmly. As Jake and I drove home, the weight of uncertainty was heavy in the car. We both knew that whatever awaited us at home was bound to be unpleasant. The thought of strangers breaking into our home was unsettling, but deep down, I had a nagging suspicion about who might be involved. "We should have seen this coming," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Changing the locks was bound to set them off." I nodded, knowing he was referring to his parents. "Let's just deal with it and move forward. We can't let this ruin what we've built." Arriving home, we found a police car parked outside. My heart sank. This was real. Officer Daniels, a tall man with a stern face, greeted us. "We caught them trying to break in. They were quite adamant about getting inside," he explained. "Who were they?" Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "It was your parents, Mr. Thompson, and some of their friends," Officer Daniels replied. Jake's face turned pale. "My parents? But why would they—" "It seems they were unaware of the lock change. When they couldn't get in, they tried to force their way," the officer continued. I could see Jake struggling to process the information. His parents had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "Can we see them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're still at the station. You can talk to them there if you wish." Jake and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between us. We needed to face this head-on. At the station, we found Robert and Susan sitting in a small room, looking both angry and embarrassed. Their friends were there too, looking equally uncomfortable. "Mom, Dad, what were you thinking?" Jake asked, his disappointment evident. Robert stood up, his expression defiant. "We came to check on the house. We always have a key. Why did you change the locks without telling us?" "It's our house, Dad. You can't just come and go as you please. We've talked about this," Jake replied, trying to keep his calm. Susan started to cry. "We just wanted to be close to you. We never thought you'd lock us out." "It's not about locking you out. It's about respect and privacy. You can't break into our house because you feel entitled to it, I said, finding my voice. Their friends looked on, awkward and silent, clearly regretting being part of this mess. We're sorry, but we didn't know what else to do, one of them mumbled. Officer Daniels stepped in. We understand it's a family matter, but breaking and entering is a serious offense. We need assurances this won't happen again. Jake looked at his parents, a mix of sadness and resolve in his eyes. This can't happen again, Mom and Dad. You need to understand boundaries. Robert and Susan nodded, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. We left the station with heavy hearts. The drive back home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. The events of the day had taken a toll, and as we walked back into our home, we knew things would never be the same again. The days following the incident were like walking through a thick fog. Jake and I were trying to make sense of everything while dealing with the aftermath. We had to have several uncomfortable conversations with neighbors, explaining what had happened. It was embarrassing and draining. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Jake let out a long sigh. I never thought my parents would go this far, he said, shaking his head. I reached out and held his hand. It's hard, I know, but we'll get through this together. He squeezed my hand in response, and we sat there in silence, each lost in our thoughts. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. I got up to answer it, finding our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, standing there with a concerned look. Rosie, dear, is everything all right? We saw the police the other day, she said, her voice full of worry. Yes, Mrs. Henderson. It was a family issue, but it's under control now. Thank you for checking in, I replied, offering her a small smile. She nodded, still looking uncertain. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. After she left, Jake looked at me. Maybe we should have a small get-together. Invite the neighbors, clear the air. What do you think? I thought about it for a moment. That's a good idea. Let's do it this weekend. The preparations kept us busy, and for a brief time, it felt good to focus on something positive. We invited a few neighbors, keeping it small and casual. The day of the get-together arrived, and our guests slowly trickled in. The atmosphere was light, and the conversation flowed. It was a much-needed distraction. During the evening, Mrs. Henderson approached me. You two are such a lovely couple. It's a shame about the trouble with your in-laws. I gave her a reassuring smile. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. We're handling it the best we can. As the evening wound down, Jake and I felt a sense of relief. The event had served its purpose, easing the tension in the neighborhood. The past few weeks had been a roller coaster, but Jake and I knew what needed to be done. Setting boundaries was the only way forward. We sat at the kitchen table, carefully drafting the rules we felt were necessary for our sanity and the health of our relationship. We can't just go on like this, Jake. It's time for a change, I said firmly, pen in hand. He nodded, looking somber. I know. It's just going to be tough. Once we were ready, we invited Jake's parents over to discuss the new rules. The atmosphere was tense as they sat down in our living room. Jake cleared his throat, and I could see his hands were trembling slightly. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about some changes we're making, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. His parents looked at us, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. We've decided to set some boundaries regarding your visits to our house, I continued, trying to sound as calm and composed as possible. Robert, Jake's father, raised an eyebrow. What kind of boundaries? Jake took a deep breath. First, we need you to call and ask before coming over. No more unexpected visits. And we can't give you the keys back. It's important for us to have our own space, I added, trying to sound as gentle as possible. Susan, Jake's mother, immediately looked upset. But we're family. Why are you doing this to us? It's about respect and privacy, Susan, I replied. We love you, but we need these boundaries for the sake of our relationship. Their reaction was immediate and emotional. Susan started crying, and John's face turned red with anger. This is outrageous! We're your parents! How could you treat us like strangers? Robert exclaimed, his voice raising. We're not trying to hurt you, Jake said, his voice strained. We just need some rules. Susan sobbed. We refuse to accept these rules. It's like you don't want us in your lives anymore." The conversation spiraled from there. No matter how much we tried to explain, they wouldn't listen. They categorically refused to comply with the rules and kept crying, playing the victims. Seeing no way to reach an understanding, Jake and I exchanged a resigned look. "Maybe it's best if we take a break from each other for a while," Jake finally said, his voice heavy with sadness. I nodded in agreement, though my heart ached at the thought. Jake's parents left our house in tears, and we were left in a deafening silence. It was one of the hardest decisions we had ever made, but we knew it was necessary. We needed space, and they needed time to understand and respect our boundaries. In the quiet of our home, Jake wrapped his arm around me. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." I leaned into his embrace. "It's okay. We had to stand up for ourselves. Maybe with time, they'll understand." As we sat there, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt and sadness. But deep down, I knew we had made the right choice. Setting boundaries was essential, even if it meant stepping back from family for a while. We are not in contact with Robert and Susan at the moment. Perhaps you will condemn us for this, but we decided to wait until they themselves understand the wrongness of their actions.
My name is Helen Collins. I'm 29 years old, and I work at the local library in a small town that most people have probably never heard of. My life is simple, maybe too simple for some, but it's mine. I've always been the quiet type, preferring the company of books to the loud outside world. The library is my sanctuary. It's a small, old building with creaky floors and shelves that have seen better days. But to me, it's perfect. Every day, I open the library doors at 8 a.m., turn on the lights, and breathe in the familiar scent of books. It's a routine that never gets old. My parents passed away when I was young, so I was raised by my grandmother. She was a kind woman, always encouraging me to read and learn. But she's gone now too, and I'm all alone. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and my small world. Good morning, Helen. Mr. Jenkins, a regular visitor, greets me as he walks in. He's an elderly man who spends his days reading history books. Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The new shipment of history books arrived yesterday. I've set them aside for you, I reply with a smile. Ah, you know me too well, dear. He chuckles, shuffling towards the designated shelf. The day goes on like this, with familiar faces coming and going. I help a group of kids find books for their school project, recommend a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and guide Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a quiet life, but I like it. I find comfort in the predictability, the routine. And then one day, everything changed. The day Jack walked into my life. He came in looking for a book, but I could tell he wasn't the regular library type. He seemed out of place with his crisp suit and confident stride. "Can you help me find a book?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "Of course. What are you looking for?" I replied, trying to keep my composure. "It's a novel, The Great Gatsby, I believe." "Right this way," I said, leading him to the classic section. As I handed him the book, our hands brushed briefly, sending a jolt through me. It was a simple touch, but it lingered in my mind. "Thank you, Helen," he said, reading my name tag. "I'm Jack." "It's nice to meet you, Jack." That brief encounter marked the beginning of everything. The beginning of a love that I thought would last a lifetime. The beginning of a journey that would take me from the quiet life I knew into a world of chaos and betrayal. If only I had known then what I know now, maybe things would have been different. But life doesn't come with a warning label, and sometimes we just have to learn the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack began to visit the library more frequently. It was odd, considering he didn't strike me as the reading type. But every time he came in, he'd ask for a book recommendation and then spend a few minutes chatting with me. One day, he walked in just as I was struggling with a box of newly arrived books. "Need a hand with that?" he offered, walking over. "That would be great, thanks," I said, relieved. As we placed the books on the shelves, he asked, "So, Helen, what got you into working at a library?" I shrugged. "I've always loved books. They're like friends, you know. Plus, it's nice and quiet here." He laughed. "I can see that. It's like a whole different world." Our conversations grew longer with each visit. I found out that Jack worked in his family's business, something to do with real estate. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then one day, he surprised me. "Helen, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. I was taken aback. "Like a date?" "Yes, like a date," he smiled. I hesitated. This was new territory for me, but there was something about him that made me want to say yes. "Okay, sure, I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We went to a small restaurant in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my usually solitary life. Walking home, Jack said, "I had a really great time tonight, Helen. You're very different from the people I usually meet." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. He continued, "I'd like to see you again. Would that be okay?" I nodded. Yes, I'd like that. From then on, we started seeing each other more regularly. He'd take me out to dinner, or we'd go for walks. It was nice. For once, I felt like I was part of something more, part of a world that wasn't just about books and quietness. It wasn't long before I fell for him. Hard. He was charming and attentive, and he made me feel special. And when he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs. I wish I had known that the charm was just a mask, a cover for something much less pleasant. But love has a way of blinding you, of making you ignore the warning signs. And I was very much in love, or at least I thought I was. After Jack and I got engaged, things started to change. It began with his parents. They didn't approve of me from the start. They thought I was below their son because I didn't come from money. The first time I met them, it was clear they didn't like me. We were at their house for dinner, and I was nervous. It was a big, fancy house, nothing like what I was used to. "Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard," Jack introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. Margaret looked me up and down. So you're the girl who works at the library." "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. Richard chimed in. "Jack, couldn't you find someone more suitable?" I felt like crawling into a hole. The dinner was long and uncomfortable. They made it clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. But Jack stood up for me, which made me love him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I agreed without making a fuss. Once we got married, I moved into Jack's house, which was actually his parents' house. They had given it to him as a wedding gift, but they acted like it was still theirs. His parents came over all the time, unannounced. They'd walk in and start ordering me around. "Helen, make us some coffee," Margaret would demand as soon as she walked in. And I would, without saying anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. One day, Margaret pointed at the TV and said, "Remember, Helen, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." It was like that with everything. They reminded me constantly that everything in the house wasn't mine. Jack started changing too. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He started joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. One evening, I was trying to decide what to wear for a family event. I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he said, laughing. I was hurt. It was like he was a different person around his parents. He didn't stand up for me anymore. Instead, he laughed along with them. It was exhausting, living in that house. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted guest. I kept hoping things would get better, but they only got worse. The stress got to me. I started having stomach pains, bad ones. I tried to ignore them, but one day I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was stress-related. I was in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt so alone. Then, one day, a notary came to my room. He had news. My great-aunt, someone I barely remembered, had passed away, and she had left me her fortune, $30 million. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of money, but suddenly, I wasn't just the poor girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents found out, they came to visit. Suddenly, they were all smiles and sweetness. "Darling, we're so happy for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, we're a family. We should support each other," Richard added. I didn't buy it. It was too much of a change. After they left, I overheard them talking outside my room. They didn't know I was listening. "She's such a fool. Can you believe our luck?" Jack laughed. "We need to make sure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Maybe you should have a child with her." "That will tie her down," Margaret suggested. I felt sick to my stomach. These people didn't care about me. They just wanted my money. I knew then what I had to do. I had to get out of that house, away from these people. I had to take control of my life. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I left the hospital with a plan in my mind. I knew what I had to do. As I got home, Jack and his parents were waiting. They were all smiles, acting like the caring family they never were. "Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but didn't say much. I needed to act normal, not to tip them off. Jack came closer. "So, when do you get the inheritance?" he asked, a little too eagerly. I looked at him, the man I thought I loved, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. "Soon," I said. "But it's not something you need to worry about." His smile faltered a bit. "But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right?" I forced a smile. "Of course, darling." That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head, their fake concern, their greed. It made me sick. I got up and started writing. I wrote down everything they had done, everything they had said. It was like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out. The next morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I explained everything, showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was shocked but said the agreement would protect me. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me. When I got back, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I walked in. "There she is, our brave girl," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. "I have something to say." They all looked at me, curious. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. Then Margaret erupted. "What? You ungrateful little—" Jack was on his feet. "Helen, you can't be serious. We love you." "Do you, Jack?" "Because I don't feel loved. I feel used." Margaret was fuming. "We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance." I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you can't. This says neither of us can claim the other's property in case of divorce." They were speechless. For the first time, I felt in control. I stood up. "I'm leaving. I don't want any of you to contact me." I walked out of that house, their shouts and insults trailing behind me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their disdain, their manipulation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the past. I rented a small apartment in the city. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I was still dealing with the divorce, but I felt like I could handle it. One day, I got a call from the lawyer. "Helen, there's something you should know about your great-aunt's will." I was puzzled. "What about it?" "There's a condition. You need to use a portion of your inheritance for a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish." I was surprised. I had no idea. The lawyer continued. "She was quite the philanthropist. It seems she wanted to pass that on to you." I hung up the phone, deep in thought. My great-aunt had given me a chance to do something good. It felt like a sign, a push in a new direction. I started researching charities and causes. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference. That's when I stumbled upon a small organization that helped women who were victims of domestic abuse. It struck a chord with me. I contacted them and set up a meeting. The woman I met, Linda, was passionate and dedicated. "We provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to women who have nowhere else to go," Linda explained. I listened, moved by the stories she shared. "I want to help," I said, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With Linda's guidance, I used a part of the inheritance to fund a new shelter. It was an incredible feeling, knowing I was helping other women find a way out, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the opening of the shelter. It was a small event, but the atmosphere was full of hope and gratitude. As people mingled, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah, an old colleague from the library. "Helen, is that you?" she asked, surprised. "Sarah, it's been so long," I said, hugging her. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I told her about the shelter, about my involvement. She listened, her eyes wide. "That's incredible, Helen. I had no idea." "It's a new chapter for me," I said, smiling. We spent the evening catching up. It felt good to reconnect with an old friend. It felt like pieces of my life were slowly falling back into place. As the event wrapped up, Linda came over. "Helen, I can't thank you enough. This shelter will change lives." I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe place to go. "It's the least I could do," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The days started to blend into one another, each filled with the rewarding work at the shelter. I was finding a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while, Jack's. My heart raced with a mixture of emotions, but curiosity won. "Hello, Jack," I said, my voice calm. "Helen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's urgent." His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. "Helen, I made a huge mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me," he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. "Why now, Jack?" He sighed. "My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now." I felt a surge of anger. "You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me like dirt. You laughed with them, Jack." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Helen, I know I was wrong. I've changed." I stared at him, seeing the man I once loved but now felt nothing for. "Changed or not, it's too late. I feel nothing for you, Jack. Nothing but contempt." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I married. But it was fleeting. "I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it," I said firmly. He nodded slowly, a look of resignation on his face. "I understand. I just had to try." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. The next day, there was an event at the shelter. A local artist had donated a sculpture, and it was to be unveiled in the garden. As I stood there, surrounded by people who supported and believed in me, I felt a sense of belonging. Sarah, my old colleague from the library, stood beside me. "You've done something amazing here, Helen," she said, smiling. The artist pulled the cover off the sculpture. revealing a figure of a woman reaching up to the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda, the woman who had helped me so much, came over. "Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do." I looked around at the faces filled with hope and knew she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Every day at the shelter brought new challenges and rewards. My confidence grew, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even started taking self-defense classes, something I would have never imagined doing before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret, and she stepped out as soon as she saw me. "Helen, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I have nothing to say to you, Margaret," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, just hear me out. I've realized how wrong we were," she pleaded. I stopped and looked at her. She seemed genuine, but I couldn't forget the past. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want to apologize. I treated you terribly. I've lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you, too. You were like the daughter I never had," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I felt a pang of something. Sympathy, perhaps, but I pushed it away. "Margaret, you made my life a living hell. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same," I said firmly. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. "Please, Helen, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret." As I walked away, I felt her gaze on my back, but I didn't look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back to the way things were. The next day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer. He was contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel. "He's got no leg to stand on, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you," she said confidently. I nodded. "I'm not afraid of him anymore. Let's fight this." The court date arrived, and I walked in with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flash of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it vanished quickly. The judge listened to both sides and then made her decision. The prenuptial agreement stood, and Jack's claims were dismissed. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. After the court session, Jack approached me. "Helen, I'm sorry. I was wrong," he said, his voice low. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, but now felt nothing for. "Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself," I said, and walked away. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and a new one was just beginning. At the shelter, we were planning a fundraiser, and it was taking all my attention. The support from the community was overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the place was buzzing with energy. People from all walks of life had come to support our cause. As I looked around, I realized how far I had come. From a quiet, timid woman to someone who stood up for herself and others. "Helen, you did it. This is amazing," Sarah said, coming up to me. I smiled. We did it. And there's so much more to do. As the event went on, I felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.
My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a financial advisor. That's where I met David, my now ex-husband. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He walked into my office with a stack of papers and a troubled look on his face. "Emma, right?" he said, offering a handshake. "I'm David Caldwell. I heard you're the best in sorting out financial messes." That's what they say, I replied, smiling. Let's see what we can do about yours. David was tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when he didn't. As I sifted through his documents, we started talking. It wasn't just about numbers and taxes. We talked about our favorite movies, music, and even debated over the best pizza in town. He had this easy way about him that made hours feel like minutes. You know, I never thought sorting my finances would be this enjoyable, David admitted as we wrapped up. Guess I have a magic touch, I joked. David laughed. Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? My treat, for making this not as painful as I expected. That coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekend getaways. We were inseparable. After 6 months, David proposed, and without a moment's hesitation, I said yes. It was a whirlwind romance, but it felt right. Our wedding was simple yet beautiful. Standing there, exchanging vows, I thought I had found my forever. David's mom, Barbara, was there too. She was a stern-looking woman, but seemed happy for us. You better give me grandkids soon, she whispered to me with a half-smile. Life as a married couple was blissful at first. David worked in real estate, and I continued at my firm. We shared dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We were a team, or so I thought. However, things began to change when the topic of children came up more frequently. It started with occasional remarks from Barbara, but soon became her constant demand. She would call and ask if I was pregnant yet, and during visits she'd say, "A grandchild would make this family complete." David always laughed it off. "Mom, give us some time," he'd say, but the pressure was building. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was just an excited grandmother-to-be. But her persistence started to weigh on me. It was like our marriage wasn't enough without a child. "David, your mom needs to back off a bit," I said to him one evening. "I feel like she's more in our marriage than we are." David looked uncomfortable. "She's just excited, Emma. Let's not make a big deal out of it." As time went on, Barbara's influence in our life became more and more evident. It wasn't just about her constant nagging for grandchildren. She had opinions about everything, from how we should manage our finances to what we should eat. One Saturday morning, David and I were enjoying breakfast when his phone rang. It was Barbara. David put it on speaker, as he usually did. "David, dear, are you both eating healthy? Remember, a healthy diet is important for conceiving," she said in her usual authoritative tone. David chuckled. "Yes, Mom, we're eating healthy. Don't worry." I forced a smile, but inside I was screaming. It felt like she was monitoring our every move. Things got more intense when Barbara started visiting us more frequently. One evening, she came over unannounced, carrying a stack of parenting books. "Emma, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare," she said, dumping the books on the coffee table. I glanced at David, hoping he would say something, but he just shrugged. "Thanks, Barbara. We'll look into them," I said, trying to sound grateful. Her visits became a regular occurrence. It was like she was keeping tabs on us, making sure we were doing everything right to have a child. And every time she brought up the topic, David would just nod and agree with her. One night, after another of Barbara's visits, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "David, we need to talk," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "What's up?" he asked, not looking up from the TV. "It's your mom. She's suffocating us with this baby talk. We barely have time to be a couple without her interference," I said. David finally looked at me. "She's just excited, Emma. She means well." "Excited or obsessed?" I countered. "It feels like she's the third person in our marriage." David sighed. "She's my mom. What do you want me to do? Tell her to stop caring?" "It's not about caring, David. It's about respecting our space, our decisions. Can't you see that?" David didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, and that was the end of our conversation. But it wasn't the end of the issue. If anything, it only got worse. Barbara's visits became more frequent and her comments more intrusive. "You two should go on a vacation. Just relax. It'll help with conception," she suggested one day. "Maybe Emma should quit her job, reduce the stress," she said on another occasion. It felt like she was dictating our life, and David was letting her. I started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The love and understanding that had once bonded David and me seemed to be slipping away, lost in the shadow of Barbara's overbearing presence. The constant pressure about having a baby started to take its toll on both of us. David and I were arguing more often, and the romance that once filled our home seemed to have evaporated. Still, amidst all this, I held on to the hope that things would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other. But then came the day that changed everything. David came home late one evening, looking more downcast than usual. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix us a quick dinner. "David, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. "We need to talk, Emma." That tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "It's about us. Trying to have a baby," he started, not meeting my eyes. "What about it?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "We went to the doctor, remember? For those tests?" he said, finally looking up at me. I nodded. A few weeks ago, we had gone for a fertility checkup, hoping it would put Barbara's nagging to rest. David took a deep breath. "The results came in today. It's not you, Emma. It's me." I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and confusion. "What do you mean?" "The doctor said I have a low sperm count. It's unlikely that I can father a child," he said, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, trying to offer some comfort. "David, it's okay. We can figure this out together. Maybe there's treatment or other options." He pulled his hand away, shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I won't go through any treatment. It's just not something I can do." I was stunned. "But why? If there's a chance." "It's my decision, Emma. I just can't," he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, who always seemed so strong and confident, was giving up without even trying. "David, please, don't let this come between us. We can work through it," I pleaded. He stood up, avoiding my gaze. "I need some time alone to think about all this." And just like that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there, trying to process it all. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't even consider treatment. Was his pride more important than our chance to have a family? The next few days were like walking on eggshells. David barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was short and cold. I felt a growing distance between us, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that seemed to be widening with each passing day. Then came the day that turned the crack into a gaping hole. David had been out late again. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep when he came in. He thought I was asleep and started talking to someone on the phone. "Yes, Mom, I got the results. It's not good." "No, I don't want treatment." "I know, but I can't." "Yes, I'll figure something out." Hearing him talk to his mom about something so personal, something he barely discussed with me, felt like a betrayal. It was clear that Barbara's shadow loomed larger over our marriage than I had ever realized. I lay there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, feeling utterly alone. Our marriage was crumbling, and I didn't know how to save it. Life at home had become unbearable. David and I were like strangers, living under the same roof. The love and warmth that once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life threw me a curveball. I had been feeling under the weather for a few days. At first, I thought it was just stress, but then I missed my period. A part of me was scared to even entertain the thought, but I knew I had to find out. So, one morning, I bought a pregnancy test. Sitting in the bathroom, waiting for the result felt like the longest few minutes of my life. And then, there it was. A positive result. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the talk about David's infertility, this felt like a miracle. A ray of hope in the midst of our crumbling marriage. But how would David react? I decided to tell him that evening. He came home late, as usual, and barely acknowledged me. I took a deep breath and approached him. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression weary. "What is it now, Emma?" "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How? According to the doctors, I can't." I don't know, but the test is positive. We're going to have a baby, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me? I was shocked. Trap you? David, I'm telling you we're going to have a baby. Our baby. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me. I felt like I had been slapped. Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you. He wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his own rage and disbelief. Get out. I want you out of this house, he yelled. David, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor, get a confirmation, I pleaded. But it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The next day, David was gone before I woke up. His mother, Barbara, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. You should be ashamed of yourself, Emma. Trapping my son with another man's child, she spat. I didn't cheat on David. This child is his. I defended myself. She laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger, trying to secure your future. I was stunned by her cruelty. This is David's child. I've never been with anyone else. She moved closer, her voice venomous. You have 1 week to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us. The ultimatum from Barbara was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. David and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property, were mine long before David entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to David. No reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo, every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, David was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the little life growing inside me. Talking to my unborn child became a nightly ritual, filling the emptiness with hope and love. Gradually, life in my new apartment started to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. I found comfort in my routine, and the bond with my unborn child grew stronger each day. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old things, I found a photo of David and me from happier times. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. That chapter of my life was over. Then my phone rang. It was David. Emma, I've received the divorce papers, he said, his voice emotionless. I'm glad they reached you. Please take care of the formalities, I responded calmly. There was a pause before he added, I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again. It was a cold goodbye, but it was closure. As I hung up, I realized that in my solitude, I had found an inner strength I never knew I had. I was ready to face the future, not as David's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a loving mother. It was a quiet evening, and I was sitting on the couch, browsing through a magazine while Jacob, my 4-year-old son, played with his toys on the floor. The peace was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Puzzled, I went to answer it, wondering who it could be at this hour. Standing there was a woman I barely recognized, but her eyes held a familiar sorrow. Hi, Emma. It's been a long time, she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Linda, a friend I had known through my ex-husband. Linda, yes, it has been. What brings you here? She shifted uncomfortably, looking past me at Jacob, who was now peeking around my legs. I thought you should know about David. David. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a chill down my spine. What about him? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda sighed. He's not doing well, Emma. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic. He remarried a few years ago and had a child, but the boy was born with disabilities. David couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble. The news hit me hard, but not in the way Linda might have expected. I felt a deep sadness, not for David, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. That's terrible, I said softly. Linda nodded. I thought you should know. Given your past with him, I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to set boundaries. Thank you for telling me, Linda, but that part of my life is over. David made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son. Linda looked at Jacob, then back at me. I understand, Emma. I just thought... I smiled, albeit a little sadly. I appreciate it, Linda, but my focus is on Jacob and our life now. What David does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore. She nodded, seemingly understanding. I hope you and Jacob are happy, Emma. You both deserve it. Thank you, we are. I glanced at Jacob, who was now fully engrossed in his toys again. And I intend to keep it that way. After Linda left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, taking deep breaths. The past had a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined not to let it overshadow the life I had built for myself and my son. The park was vibrant that day, with laughter and the sounds of children playing. I was there with Jacob, my heart swelling with pride as I watched him run around. Then, a familiar, unwelcome voice sliced through the air. Emma, is that you? I turned, my heart sinking. Barbara, my former mother-in-law, was approaching, her eyes fixed on Jacob. Barbara? I said coolly. What are you doing here? Ignoring my tone, her gaze was locked on Jacob. He's grown so much. He's your son, right? Yes, this is Jacob, I answered, moving subtly to stand between her and my son. Barbara's eyes sparkled with a disturbing kind of eagerness. I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson. I felt a wave of anger. And why would you want to see him? Well, you know, my other grandson. She trailed off, her face twisting. He's not... Well, he's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life. Her words struck me like a slap. The contempt in her voice for her own grandchild was appalling. Barbara, I said, my voice steely, you have no right to be part of Jacob's life. Not after everything that happened. But Emma, that was all David's doing, she protested. I shook my head. You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild. And now you speak with such disgust about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable. Barbara's face reddened. You can't keep me away from my grandson. I can, and I will, I declared firmly. Jacob doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family. She looked like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Barbara. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed. I took Jacob's hand and walked away, leaving Barbara standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Jacob looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with questions. Mommy, who was that lady? That was someone we used to know, sweetheart, I replied gently, but she's not part of our lives anymore. Sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jacob was inside, his laughter echoing as he played. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. Mom, look what I made. Jacob's voice pulled me back from my thoughts. He came running out, holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the two of us, smiling under a big, bright sun. It's beautiful, Jacob, I said, pulling him into a hug. You're quite the artist. He beamed with pride. I want to put it on the fridge. Let's do that, I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I thought about how far we'd come. There was a time when the weight of the past felt crushing, but now it seemed like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Jacob was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet. I hesitated but decided to answer it. "Hello?" It was my sister Anna. "Hey Emma, I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jacob doing?" "We're doing well, Anna. Jacob's growing up so fast," I replied, a smile in my voice. "I heard about your run-in with Barbara." "Are you okay?" she asked, concern lacing her words. I sighed. "Yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just a reminder of the past. I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Emma. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Jacob," she said encouragingly. Her words warmed my heart. "Thanks, Anna. It means a lot." We talked for a while longer, about small things, everyday life. It was comforting, this connection with my sister, a reminder of the support system I had. After hanging up, I went to the living room where Jacob's drawing was displayed on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, leaving room for healing and new beginnings. I walked to Jacob's room, watching him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, my little artist," I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place was hope, a quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the old, chipped mug that's been with me for more years than I care to remember. It's just a regular Tuesday evening, but somehow it feels like the weight of my entire life is pressing down on me. I'm Emma, a 45-year-old woman who feels like she's living a life filled with more regrets than joys. My husband, Richard, is sitting across from me, scrolling through his phone, utterly disinterested in anything I have to say. I met him when I was just a bright-eyed 20-year-old. He was charming, charismatic, and everything I thought I wanted. But here we are, 25 years later, and I can barely recognize the man I fell in love with. "Dinner was good," I say, attempting to start a conversation. He doesn't even look up. "It was okay. You've made better." His words sting, but I'm used to it. This has been my life for the past several years. The man I married, who once looked at me like I was his entire world, now barely acknowledges my existence unless it's to criticize me. I remember when I first introduced Richard to my dad. My dad was a police officer, a man who had seen the worst of people in his line of work. He took one look at Richard and said, "Emma, that man is bad news." But I was young and in love, and I thought my dad was just being overprotective. "Dad, you don't know him like I do. Richard is a good man," I had insisted. "Emma, I've been a cop for over 30 years. I know how to read people. That man is going to bring you nothing but trouble," my father had replied, his voice laced with concern. But I didn't listen. In fact, I did something I now deeply regret. I cut my father out of my life. Richard suggested it, saying we didn't need negative people who didn't believe in us. And like a fool, I agreed. For 25 years, I didn't speak to my dad. I didn't call him, didn't visit, didn't even tell him when I had my daughter Lily, who's now in college. My thoughts are interrupted by Richard's voice. "Are you even listening to me?" I realize he's been talking while I was lost in my thoughts. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "I was saying that you need to start taking better care of yourself. You've let yourself go, and it's embarrassing," he says, his tone cold. I feel a lump form in my throat. This is my life, a husband who finds every opportunity to bring me down. And as I sit there, taking in his harsh words, I can't help but think that my father was right all along. My phone rings, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glance at the caller ID and my heart skips a beat. It's a number I haven't seen in over 2 decades. It's my dad. I answer, my voice shaky. "Hello?" "Emma, it's your dad. I need to talk to you. It's important." His voice is weak, nothing like the strong, confident tone I remember. "Dad, I'm so sorry for everything." I start, but he cuts me off. "Emma, I'm sick. The doctors say I don't have much time left. I have cancer. The room spins around me as his words sink in. My dad, the man I turned my back on, is dying. And suddenly, all the years of silence, all the missed opportunities to make things right, weigh heavily on me. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'll come to see you. I'll help in any way I can, I say, tears streaming down my face. After ending the call, I turn to Richard, hoping, maybe foolishly, for some kind of support. Richard, my dad is sick. He has cancer. I need to help him. His reaction is like a slap in the face. Good. The man never liked me. Can't wait for him to be gone. His words are like a knife to my heart. In that moment, I realize just how blind I've been. My husband, the man I chose over my own father, is cruel and heartless. And I can't help but wonder if my life would have been different if I had just listened to my dad all those years ago. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed in our bedroom, my hands trembling. The room feels cold, even though it's a warm night. Richard's words keep echoing in my head. Can't wait for him to be gone. How can he be so heartless? I thought I knew him, but it seems I've been living with a stranger. I pick up my phone again, dialing my dad's number. It rings, and then finally, he picks up. Emma? His voice is weak but filled with hope. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm going to help you. I don't know how yet, but I will find a way, I say, my voice choked with emotion. Emma, you don't have to. You've got your own life. No, Dad. You're my father. I should have been there for you all these years. I'm going to make this right. We talk a little more. He tells me about his condition, about the treatments he needs but can't afford. My heart aches. I've missed so much, and now, when he needs me the most, I feel helpless. After the call, I sit there, lost in thought. Then something inside me clicks. I can't let my father suffer because of my mistakes. I need to do something. I go to the living room where Richard is watching TV. Richard, I've decided. I'm going to help my father. He needs money for his treatments. I'm going to use our savings. He looks at me like I've lost my mind. You're going to do what? Are you crazy? That's our money, Emma. We saved that for us, for our future. There won't be a future if I let my father die knowing I could have helped him. I can't live with that, I say, my resolve firm. He laughs, a cold, mocking laugh. So, the prodigal daughter returns. You think playing the good daughter now will make up for all the years you ignored him? It's pathetic. His words sting, but I don't let them sway me. I don't care what you think. I'm doing this. I go to our home office and start transferring the money. It's a lot, almost all our savings, but it doesn't matter. This is for my dad, for all the years I wasn't there for him. When I finish, I feel a sense of relief, but it's short-lived. Richard storms into the room, his face red with anger. You actually did it. You gave our money to that old man. He's my father, Richard. He's dying. What was I supposed to do? Just let him suffer? You were supposed to think about us, about our life together. But you've always been selfish, Emma, always thinking about yourself. I'm stunned. How can he twist this into something about him? Selfish? I'm trying to save my father's life. How is that selfish? He doesn't answer. Instead, he turns and leaves the room, slamming the door behind him. I'm left standing there, feeling more alone than ever. But there's also a sense of determination inside me. For the first time in years, I'm standing up for what I believe in. It's scary, but it also feels right. I pack a small bag with some clothes and essentials. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't stay here, not with Richard. Not now. I write a note, telling him I'm going to my dad's, that I need some time to figure things out. I don't know if he'll even care, but I leave it on the kitchen counter anyway. Then, with my bag in hand, I step out of the house. The night air is cool on my skin, and as I walk to my car, I feel like I'm taking the first steps towards a new life. A life where I'm no longer bound by regrets and what-ifs. A life where I can try to make things right, even if it's a little too late. The drive to my dad's house feels endless. Streetlights blur past, and I'm alone with my thoughts, a mix of fear and determination. I haven't seen my dad in over 25 years, and now I'm rushing to him in the middle of the night because he's sick and I'm all he's got. When I finally pull up to the familiar old house, my heart is racing. The place looks much the same, though a bit more worn. I hesitate for a moment before getting out of the car. What am I going to say? How is he going to react? Taking a deep breath, I walk up to the front door and knock. It takes a few moments, but then the door opens, and there he is. My dad. He's older, frailer, but it's undeniably him. "Emma," he says, his voice cracking. "You came." I nod, fighting back tears. "I'm here, Dad. I'm so sorry." He steps aside, letting me in. The house smells the same as I remember, a mix of coffee and old books. We go to the living room and sit down. It's awkward at first, but then we start talking, and it's like the years start to melt away. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have been here," I say, my voice thick with emotion. "It's okay, Emma. You're here now. That's what matters." We talk about his illness, about the treatments he needs. He shows me the medical bills, and they're staggering, but I reassure him that I've got it covered. He tries to protest, but I won't hear it. Then I tell him about Richard, about how he reacted when I said I was going to help. I don't go into all the details, just that we had a fight and that I needed some time away. My dad listens, his expression somber. "I warned you about him, Emma, but you were young, in love. I understand." "But you were right, Dad. You were right all along." He reaches out, taking my hand. "What are you going to do now?" I shake my head. "I don't know, Dad. I just don't know." We sit there for a while, just talking. It's strange, but it feels good, like we're making up for lost time. Eventually, I get up to leave. I've got a lot to figure out, and it's late. But as I'm about to walk out the door, my dad stops me. "Emma, wait. There's something you should know." He goes to his desk and pulls out a folder, thick with papers. "I've been keeping tabs on Richard. Ever since you married him. I knew he was bad news, and I wanted to protect you, just in case." He hands me the folder. It's all in there. His business deals, the women, everything. I wanted you to have it, just in case. I'm stunned. I take the folder, feeling its weight. "Dad, Thank you." He nods, a sad smile on his face. "I always wanted what was best for you, Emma. Always." I hug him, holding back tears. "I know, Dad. I know." The morning after I visited my dad, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, the folder he gave me lying unopened in front of me. I'm scared of what's inside, scared of what it means for my life, my marriage. But I know I can't ignore it. Taking a deep breath, I open the folder. There are bank statements, photos, notes. It's overwhelming. As I start to sift through the papers, the reality of my situation begins to sink in. Richard has been living a double life, and I was too blind to see it. There are photos of him with other women, some of them looking way too cozy. There are bank statements showing large amounts of money being moved around, and notes about shady business deals. It's a lot to process. I feel sick to my stomach. How could I have been so naive? How could I have ignored all the signs? I spend the morning going through everything, and by the time I'm done, I'm shaking with anger and betrayal. But there's also a sense of clarity. I know what I need to do. I call my dad. "Dad, I looked through the folder. It's a lot." "I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't want to burden you with it, but you needed to know." "I understand, and thank you. I'm going to confront him. I can't let this go on any longer." "Be careful, Emma. He's a dangerous man." "I will be. I have to do this, for me, for us." After we hang up, I get ready. I feel like I'm preparing for battle. I put the most damning evidence in a smaller folder and head to Richard's office. When I get there, his secretary tries to stop me, but I push past her. I storm into his office, and he looks up, surprised. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I say, my voice steady even though my hands are shaking. He smirks. "About what?" "About this," I say, throwing the folder on his desk. "About your lies, your cheating, your dirty business." He goes pale, but then he regains his composure. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know everything, Richard. My dad has been keeping tabs on you since we got married. It's all here. The women, the money, everything." He starts to get angry. "Your dad? That old fool? He's just trying to break us up. He's always hated me. He was right about you, and I was too blind to see it, but not anymore. He stands up, coming around the desk. You're not going to ruin me, Emma. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me. Not anymore. I want a divorce, Richard. I want out of this sham of a marriage. He laughs, a cold, bitter laugh. You think you can just walk away? You think you can take me down? I won't let you. I'll ruin you first. I stand my ground, even though I'm scared. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I know the truth, and I'm not going to let you control me any longer. He looks at me, really looks at me, and I can see the realization dawning in his eyes. He knows he's lost. Get out, he says finally. Get out and don't come back. The next few days are a blur. I spend most of my time at my dad's house, trying to figure out my next move. The thought of going back to the house I shared with Richard makes my skin crawl. I can't face him, not yet. My dad is a rock during all of this. He listens, offers advice, but mostly just lets me talk. It's comforting, being here with him. It feels like I'm making up for lost time. One afternoon, we're sitting in the living room when my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize, but I answer it anyway. Hello? Is this Emma Richards? A man's voice asks. Yes, it is. Who's this? My name is Detective Harris. I'm with the City Police Department. I'd like to talk to you about your husband. My heart skips a beat. What about him? We've been investigating him for some time now. We believe he's involved in a number of illegal activities. We received some information recently that has accelerated our investigation. I glance at my dad, who's watching me closely. What kind of information? It's best if we discuss this in person. Can you come down to the station? Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can. I hang up, feeling a mix of fear and relief. It's happening. It's really happening. Dad, the police want to talk to me about Richard. They think he's involved in illegal activities. My dad nods. It's about time. You need to tell them everything, Emma. Don't hold back. I won't. I'm done protecting him. I head to the police station, my mind racing. When I get there, Detective Harris is waiting for me. He's a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Richards, he says as he leads me to an interview room. Please, call me Emma, and thank you for seeing me. We sit down, and he gets right to the point. We've been investigating your husband for some time. We believe he's involved in a number of fraudulent activities, including money laundering and embezzlement. I nod, trying to keep my composure. I believe you're right. I have some evidence that might help. I tell him everything. About the folder my dad gave me, about the bank statements, the photos, the notes. I tell him about the confrontation with Richard, about how he threatened me. Detective Harris listens, taking notes. When I'm done, he looks at me, his expression serious. This is very helpful, Emma. With your testimony and the evidence you've provided, we can build a strong case against your husband. What happens now? I ask, feeling a mix of emotions. We'll continue our investigation, gather more evidence. It's likely we'll need you to testify in court. Are you prepared for that? I nod, feeling a surge of determination. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he pays for what he's done. Detective Harris nods. Good, we'll be in touch. And Emma, you're doing the right thing. I spend my days helping Dad around the house and taking him to his doctor's appointments. His health seems to be holding steady, a small blessing in the midst of everything else. One afternoon, while we're sitting in the living room, my phone buzzes with a message from Detective Harris. My heart leaps into my throat as I read it. Case moving forward. Charges filed against Richard. We'll need you to testify. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Dad, they're charging Richard. It's actually happening. Dad looks up from his newspaper, his eyes soft. Good. It's about time he faced the consequences. The day of the trial arrives. I wear a simple blue dress, wanting to look presentable, but not overdressed. Dad insists on coming with me, even though I tell him he doesn't have to. I'm not letting you face that man alone, he says, his voice firm. The courtroom is intimidating, with its high ceilings and wooden pews. Richard is already there, looking smug in his expensive suit. When he sees me, his expression darkens. I take my seat, trying to ignore the knots in my stomach. Dad sits next to me, a solid presence at my side. The trial begins. The prosecutor lays out the case against Richard. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. The evidence is overwhelming. I can see Richard squirming in his seat. Then it's my turn to testify. I take the stand, my hands shaking slightly. The prosecutor asks me to tell the court about my relationship with Richard, about the money he took, the abuse, the threats. I speak slowly, making sure to tell the truth, the whole truth. Richard's lawyer tries to shake me with his questions, but I stand firm. I'm not afraid of Richard anymore. When I'm done, I step down from the stand, feeling like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. Dad gives me a small smile, his eyes proud. The trial goes on for several days. Witnesses, evidence, testimonies, it all blurs together. But through it all, I can see the case against Richard building, piece by piece. Finally, the jury goes out to deliberate. The wait is agonizing, every second stretching out endlessly. Dad and I don't talk much, just sit together in silent support. Then, the moment of truth arrives. The jury is back. We're called into the courtroom. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely hear anything else. The judge asks the jury for their verdict. The foreman stands up, a slip of paper in his hand. We find the defendant, Richard Richards, guilty on all counts. A wave of relief washes over me, so strong I almost feel dizzy. Richard is staring at the jury, his face a mask of disbelief. The judge thanks the jury and then turns to Richard. Given the severity of the crimes and the evidence presented, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in prison and order the return of all funds embezzled from Emma Richards. Richard's face crumples. He starts to say something, but the bailiffs are already leading him away. As I walk out of the courtroom, I feel like I'm walking on air. Justice has been served. Richard will pay for what he's done. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can finally start to move on. Dad puts his arm around me as we walk. I'm proud of you, Emma. You stood up to him. You did what was right. I lean into him, feeling tears prick my eyes. Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you. We walk out of the courthouse together, ready to face whatever comes next. Life after the trial feels different, like waking up from a long, turbulent dream. The house is quieter now, just me and Dad. We've settled into a comfortable routine, looking after each other. But there's one thing I haven't done yet, one loose end that still nags at me. My daughter, Lily. I've been thinking about her a lot, about how I've been a less than perfect mother, how I let her grow up in a toxic environment. The guilt gnaws at me every day. But today, I decide, is the day I'll try to make things right. I pick up my phone and dial her number, my hands trembling slightly. Mom? Lily sounds surprised when she answers. Hey, Lily, can we talk? Maybe meet somewhere? There's a pause, and for a moment, I'm afraid she'll say no. But then she agrees, and we decide to meet at a small cafe near her college. I arrive early, nervous energy making me fidgety. When Lily walks in, my heart aches. She's grown into a beautiful young woman, but there's a wariness in her eyes that I hate to see. Hey, I say as she sits down. Hey, she replies, her voice guarded. I take a deep breath. Lily, I'm sorry. I know I wasn't the mother you needed. I let you down, let you grow up in a bad situation. I'm so sorry. Lily looks at me, her expression unreadable. Why now, Mom? Why after all this time? I know it's late, way too late, but I've left Richard, your father. He's in jail now. I've been trying to make things right, and I realized I need to start with you. Lily's eyes flicker with something, pain maybe, or disappointment. Mom, I spent years wishing you'd leave him, wishing we could just be a normal family, but you always chose him over me. Her words sting, but they're the truth. I know, and I can't change that, but I'm here now. I want to be better, do better, if you give me a chance. We sit in silence for a long time. I can see Lily wrestling with her emotions, and I don't blame her. I've hurt her, and it's not something that can be fixed with a simple apology. Finally, she speaks. I want to believe you, Mom, But it's not easy. I've got a lot of anger, a lot of hurt. I know, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want a chance to show you that I can be a better mother, that I can be someone you can rely on. Lily sighs, running a hand through her hair. Okay, we can try, but it's going to take time. A wave of relief washes over me. Thank you, Lily. That's all I'm asking for. We talk for a while longer about her college, her plans for the future. It's awkward at times, but it feels like a start, like maybe there's a chance for us to build something new. Months pass, and the world around me starts to take on a new shape, a new meaning. Dad's health has been improving steadily. The doctors call it a miracle, but I think it's the love and care we've been surrounding him with. He's even started going for short walks around the neighborhood. Today, as I watch him sitting on the porch, reading a newspaper, a sense of calm washes over me. I walk over and sit beside him, taking in the peaceful morning. You're looking better every day, Dad, I say, smiling at him. He looks up, his eyes twinkling. Feeling better too, Emma. It's like I've been given a second chance at life. I nod, feeling a surge of gratitude. We both have, Dad. Just then, Lily arrives. She's been visiting more often, and with each visit, I feel our bond strengthening. She waves at us, a bright smile on her face. Morning, you two, she greets cheerfully. Morning, Lily, Dad replies. Join us. We were just enjoying the morning sun. Lily takes a seat, and for a while, we sit in comfortable silence, basking in the warmth of the sun and each other's company. Mom, I've been thinking, Lily starts, breaking the silence. I want to help people who've been in situations like ours, maybe volunteer at a shelter or something. My heart swells with pride. That's a wonderful idea, Lily. Dad nods in agreement. Using your experience to help others, that's a noble path. Lily's eyes are determined. I want to make a difference, even if it's small. I reach out and squeeze her hand. You already are, sweetheart. Our conversation drifts to lighter topics after that. Plans for the weekend, a new recipe I want to try, the book Dad's been reading. It feels normal, and for the first time in a long time, I feel content. I have my father, my daughter, and a newfound strength within me. I've survived the storm, and now I'm ready to embrace the calm after it. Ready to build a new life, a better life. A life where I'm not just surviving, but thriving.
It was just another shift at the hospital. My name's Eliza Bennett, a 40-year-old ER nurse who's seen it all. I like my job, even though it's tough sometimes. The hospital's short on specialists, so I often pull double duty, working in the ER and wherever else I'm needed. Tonight, I was in the ER, same as always. My husband, Michael, well, he's been busy building his political career, working as an assistant to the mayor. We don't talk much about my work. He's not too interested. We've been living our separate lives under the same roof, each absorbed in our own worlds. We never had kids. I wanted them for a long time, but it just didn't happen. Eventually, Michael told me he was fine without children. He said he liked the quiet, so it's just been the two of us, living in a kind of silent agreement. The ER was buzzing with the usual chaos, nurses and doctors rushing around, the constant beeping of machines. I was checking on a patient when I heard the ambulance siren. It was a call from a residential area, something about a sick baby. I've always had a soft spot for kids, so I volunteered to go. My colleague, John, was driving the ambulance. He's a good guy, always has a joker ready to lighten the mood. We've worked together for years. Ready for another adventure, Elisa? John asked as we hopped into the ambulance. Always, I replied with a half smile. We chatted about trivial things on the way, the weather, a new restaurant in town. It was a way to keep the tension at bay, to stay calm before facing whatever awaited us. The address led us to a fancy neighborhood, the kind where each house looked like it could be on a postcard. John whistled as we pulled up to a large, well-lit house. Someone's doing well for themselves, he commented. I just nodded, grabbing my medical bag. We were met at the door by a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She was holding a baby. and I could see the worry etched on her face. "Please, help my baby. He's got a fever and he won't stop crying," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Let's take a look," I said, trying to sound reassuring. Her mother, an older woman with kind eyes, stood by her side. I could see where the young woman got her looks. They led us into a spacious living room where I began examining the baby. I didn't know it then, but that night was going to change everything. My ordinary life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. As I examined the baby, I could tell something was wrong. He was burning up with fever and seemed to be having spasms. I needed to act fast. "John, we need to cool him down now," I said urgently. John nodded, quickly understanding the situation. "Got it, Eliza. I'll get some ice packs and a cool cloth." While John fetched the supplies, I turned to the young woman. "I'm Eliza. What's your baby's name?" She was on the verge of tears. "His name is Liam. He was fine this afternoon, and then suddenly—" "It's okay," I said gently. "We're going to take care of Liam." John came back with the ice packs and a cloth. We worked together, trying to bring down Liam's fever. The young woman, who I learned was named Sophia, and her mother watched us, anxiety written all over their faces. "Is he going to be okay?" Sophia's mother asked. She was trying to stay strong, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "We're doing everything we can," I assured her. After a few tense minutes, Liam's fever started to come down. He stopped convulsing and began to calm. Relief washed over Sophia's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "We should still get him to a hospital to be checked over," I suggested. "Better safe than sorry." Sophia nodded. "Of course, whatever he needs." As we prepared to move Liam, the front door opened. I didn't pay it much attention until I heard a familiar voice. "What's going on here? Sophia, are you okay?" I froze. That voice. I'd know it anywhere. It was Michael, my husband. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing in the doorway. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" Michael's voice was a mix of surprise and something else. Fear, maybe. "I could ask you the same question," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Sophia looked from Michael to me and back again. "You two know each other?" Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Eliza is my wife," he finally managed to say. I confirmed, "Yes, I am his wife." The room went silent. Sophia's eyes widened, and her mother let out a gasp. I could feel John's eyes on me, full of questions. "Your wife?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. She looked at Michael, hurt and confusion written all over her face. Michael didn't answer. He just stood there, looking like he wished the ground would swallow him up. In that moment, I realized my ordinary life was over. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The room was thick with tension. I couldn't believe Michael was here, in this house, with Sophia and her baby. I felt like I was in some kind of bad dream. Sophia was the first to break the silence. "Michael, why is she calling you her husband?" Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain?" Sophia's voice rose. "Explain why my baby's nurse is claiming to be your wife." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath. "Because I am his wife. We've been married for 10 years. Sophia's face crumpled. "But you told me you were divorced." Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking desperate. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was going to tell you, You just what?" Sophia's mother cut in, her voice sharp. "Lied to my daughter, to us?" John, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Maybe we should give you some space to talk this out." I nodded, grateful for his intervention. Yes, we should go. Liam's stable, but he still needs to be seen at the hospital. As John and I started to move Liam's carrier, the front door opened again. Another surprise. This time, an older man walked in. I recognized him immediately. Mayor Thomas Harrington, Michael's boss. "What's all this commotion?" the mayor asked, looking around the room. Sophia rushed to him. "Dad, this is complicated." The mayor's eyes landed on Michael. "Michael, what's going on?" Before Michael could respond, Sophia blurted out, "Michael's married, Dad, and he lied to me about it." The mayor's expression turned from confusion to anger. "Married? Is this true, Michael?" Michael nodded, unable to meet the mayor's gaze. "Yes, sir, it's true." I could see the wheels turning in the mayor's head. "And you're his wife?" he asked, looking at me. "Yes, I am," I confirmed. The mayor shook his head. "I can't believe this. Michael, you've been working for me for over a year, and I had no idea." Michael tried to say something, but the mayor held up a hand to stop him. "Save it. I need some time to process this." Sophia was crying now, her mother comforting her. The mayor looked at his daughter and granddaughter with a mixture of sadness and anger. I felt like I was watching everything from a distance. This was my life falling apart, but it felt like a scene from a TV show. As John and I finally left the house with Liam, I couldn't help but glance back. Michael was standing there looking lost. Part of me felt sorry for him, but another part of me was angry, so very angry. I had no idea what was going to happen next. All I knew was that my ordinary life was gone, replaced by something much messier and more complicated. After dropping Liam off at the hospital and making sure he was in good hands, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. I needed answers. I needed to talk to Michael. I drove home, my mind racing. When I got there, Michael's car was in the driveway. I took a deep breath and went inside. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he hadn't moved since he got home. He looked up when I came in, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. "Eliza, He started, but trailed off. I sat down across from him. "I want to know everything, Michael. How long has this been going on? Why did you lie to her? To me?" Michael took a deep breath. "It started a year ago, at a work event. I met Sophia and we hit it off. I know I should have told her the truth, but I saw an opportunity." Opportunity? I couldn't hide the hurt in my voice. With her being the mayor's daughter, I thought... He paused, struggling to find the words. I thought it could help my career. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "So, our marriage, our life together, it meant nothing to you?" "It's not like that, Eliza. I do care about you, but I felt stuck. I thought I needed more." "And a baby. Did you plan that too?" My voice was rising now, anger mixing with the hurt. "No, that was an accident. But when Sophia told me, I thought maybe it could all work out. I could have this new life." "A new life?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And what about our life? What about me?" Michael looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't know. I thought maybe we could get a divorce, and it would be better for both of us." "So, you were just going to leave me? After 10 years? I was going to talk to you about it. I just needed to figure things out first." I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and disbelief. "You were going to leave me and marry her, weren't you?" Michael didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I knew the truth. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe you would do this to me." "I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant to hurt you." "Sorry doesn't fix this, Michael. You've lied to me, to Sophia, to everyone, and now everything's falling apart." Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but I stood up. "I need some time to think, to figure out what I'm going to do." As I walked away, I could feel Michael's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, but my mind was elsewhere. Michael tried to talk to me, but I couldn't deal with it. Not yet. Then, one evening, I found myself at Sophia's doorstep. I needed to talk to her, to understand her side of the story. I rang the bell, and after a moment, she opened the door. "Eliza?" Sophia looked surprised to see me. "I think we need to talk," I said. She hesitated, but then nodded, stepping aside to let me in. We sat down in her living room, an awkward silence hanging in the air. "Why are you here?" Sophia finally asked. "I want to understand. What did Michael tell you about us?" Sophia took a deep breath. "He said he was divorced, that he'd been single for a while. I had no idea about you until you showed up that night." I nodded, feeling a pang of sadness. "And the baby? Liam?" She looked down, tears welling in her eyes. "He was a surprise. Michael said we could be a family, that he wanted to be there for us. I believed him." I could hear the pain in her voice, and despite everything, I felt sorry for her. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry he lied to both of us." She wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry too. I never wanted to be part of something like this." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. "Did you love him?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to know the answer. Sophia looked up, her expression sad. "I thought I did. But now, I don't know what to believe. He lied about everything." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Yeah, I get that." We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories, our confusion, our pain. It was strange, talking like this with the other woman, but it was also comforting in a way. When I left, I felt a little lighter, like I'd let go of some of the anger and hurt. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but it was a start. As I drove home, I thought about Michael, about our marriage, about everything that had happened. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I needed to make a decision, for my sake and for my future. The weeks following the revelation of Michael's betrayal felt like a stormy sea, each day tossing me between waves of anger, disbelief, and an unexpected sense of liberation. As I braced myself for the legal battles ahead, the reality of the situation became crystal clear. It was me and Mayor Harrington versus Michael. The day of the trial dawned like any other, but with a weight that felt like a heavy cloud hanging over me. Walking into the courtroom, I was a mix of nerves and determination. Mayor Harrington gave me a nod of solidarity as we took our seats. The courtroom buzzed with the quiet chatter of spectators and the shuffling of papers. When Michael walked in, escorted by his lawyer, my heart raced. He avoided eye contact, but I could feel the tension between us. The trial began with the mayor's case. His lawyer presented evidence of Michael's deception, how he had lied about being divorced and manipulated Sophia, the mayor's daughter. Photographs, texts, and emails painted a clear picture of Michael's duplicity. Mayor Harrington himself took the stand, his disappointment and anger toward Michael evident in his testimony. Sophia also testified, her voice trembling as she recounted the lies Michael had fed her. Then, it was my turn. My lawyer laid out the case against Michael, highlighting his infidelity and deceit. I took the stand, my hands shaking slightly. The lawyer asked me to recount how I discovered Michael's affair and the events that followed. As a nurse, I am trained to stay calm in emergencies, I began, my voice steady. But nothing could have prepared me for the shock of finding my husband with another woman and a child he had kept hidden from me. The courtroom was silent, hanging on my every word. I spoke about our marriage, the struggles, and how Michael's ambition had slowly overshadowed our relationship. When it was Michael's turn, his defense seemed weak. His lawyer tried to downplay the situation, suggesting misunderstandings and miscommunications. But the evidence was overwhelming. Michael himself stumbled through his testimony, his excuses sounding hollow and insincere. As the trial proceeded, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. For years, I had lived in the shadow of Michael's ambitions, but here, in this courtroom, I was reclaiming my life. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Michael was found guilty of fraud and deceit in both cases. There was a murmur in the courtroom, a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. As we exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed around, but I declined to comment. This victory was not about public attention. It was personal, a step towards healing and moving on. Driving home, the weight of the past weeks began to lift. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. The trial had not just been about legal justice, it was a journey to self-discovery and reclaiming the narrative of my own life. That evening, as I sat quietly at home, I realized the trial was more than a closure. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was not just a spectator in my life, but the author of my own story. The trial was over, but its ripples were still felt in every corner of my life. The legal victory was clear, but the emotional landscape was more complicated. I had won, but at what cost? The weeks following the trial were a blur. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the routine of my shifts at the hospital. It was during one of these shifts that I ran into Sophia, the mayor's daughter, in the hospital corridor. "Hey," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting a shared understanding of pain and betrayal. "Hi, Sophia," I replied. "How are you holding up?" "It's been tough," she admitted, cradling her baby in her arms. "But I'm managing. And you?" "Day by day," I said, offering a small smile. "Taking it day by day." We exchanged a few more words before parting ways, a silent acknowledgement of the strange bond that now linked us. Back at home, the loneliness of the empty house sometimes felt overwhelming. I had grown used to Michael's absence, but the finality of the divorce brought a new kind of solitude. It was during these quiet moments that I would often find myself reflecting on the past, on the choices I had made, and the ones that had been made for me. One evening, as I was sorting through old papers, I came across an envelope addressed to me. It was from Michael. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. As I read his letter, his words of apology and explanation felt empty. He talked about his mistakes, his regrets, and his desire to make things right. But it was too little, too late. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, feeling a surge of anger, and then, surprisingly, a sense of release. Michael was part of my past, but he would not define my future. A few days later, I received a call from Mayor Harrington. He wanted to meet for coffee, to thank me personally for my courage during the trial. Sitting across from him in the small cafe, I felt a sense of respect for the man who had stood by his daughter and supported me through the legal ordeal. "Thank you for meeting me, Eliza," he said, his voice sincere. "Your strength during the trial was admirable." "I did what I had to do," I replied, stirring my coffee, "for myself and for Sophia. I want you to know that the City Council is here to support you," he continued. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out." I nodded, appreciative of his offer, but determined to stand on my own 2 feet. As I walked back home, I realized that the aftermath of the trial was not just about picking up the pieces, it was about building something new. My marriage to Michael had ended, but my life was still very much in progress. In the following weeks, I made a conscious decision to focus on myself. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and even began considering furthering my education in nursing. The journey was not easy. There were days of doubt and moments of loneliness. But there was also a newfound sense of freedom and possibility. I was no longer tied to Mikhail's ambitions or his betrayals. I was my own person, with my own path to forge. As I look back on that tumultuous time, I realize that the aftermath was not just about recovering from a betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I wanted out of life. It was about learning to stand alone, not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to face whatever the future might hold.
My name is Olivia. I'm a 30-year-old woman who loves numbers and planning. I have a good job and a stable life. People always said I was good with numbers. This skill has helped me a lot in life. But everything changed when I met Michael. I first saw Michael at a party. I don't usually go to parties, but my friend Sarah convinced me. "Come on, Olivia, you need to get out more," she had said. At the party, I was standing alone, holding a drink, when Michael walked up to me. He was tall and had a smile that made people feel at ease. "Hi, I'm Michael. I don't think we've met," he said, extending his hand. I shook his hand. "I'm Olivia." "So, Olivia, what brings you here?" he asked. I shrugged. "My friend dragged me here. I'm not much of a party person." "Neither am I," Michael laughed. "But sometimes it's good to get out of your comfort zone." We talked for a while. Michael was easy to talk to. He listened to me and made me laugh. He told me about his job at a local bookstore and his love for old movies. I told him about my job as an accountant and my love for puzzles. As the night went on, we found ourselves sitting away from the crowd, lost in our conversation. It was strange. We were so different, yet we connected so easily. When the party ended, Michael asked for my number. "I'd like to see you again, Olivia. Maybe we can go for coffee?" I hesitated, but then nodded. "Sure, that would be nice." We started seeing each other after that night. We went on dates, watched movies, and talked for hours. Michael was charming and kind. He made me feel special. But there was one thing that bothered me. Michael didn't plan much. He lived in the moment, which was the opposite of me. I love to plan everything. It made me feel in control. One day, I brought this up. "Michael, don't you think you should plan more? It's important to have a plan." Michael just smiled. "Olivia, I like the way I live. Planning is good, but sometimes you have to just go with the flow." I didn't understand it, but I liked him too much to argue. Months passed, and our relationship grew stronger. One evening, Michael took me to a quiet spot by the river. It was a beautiful night. The stars were out, and the air was fresh. "Olivia," Michael said, turning to me, "I love you. I know we're different, but I think that's what makes us special. Will you marry me?" I was shocked. Marriage was a big step. But looking into Michael's eyes, I saw sincerity and love. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you," I said. And that's how my life took a turn. I, Olivia, the woman who loved numbers and planning, was going to marry Michael, the charming, easygoing man who lived in the moment. It was unexpected, but sometimes life is like that. It surprises you when you least expect it. When Michael and I decided to get married, I imagined a small wedding, just close family and friends, a simple ceremony, and maybe a dinner afterward. But things didn't go as I had imagined. We met each other's parents to share the news. My parents liked Michael right away. "He's a simple, honest man," my dad said, shaking Michael's hand. Michael's parents, on the other hand, seemed relieved. "It's good you found someone serious," his mom, Margaret, said with a sigh. As we started planning the wedding, Michael and I sat down with our parents. "I was thinking of a small wedding," I began, looking at Michael for support. He nodded in agreement, but Margaret had other ideas. "Oh no, dear. Michael is our only son. We must have a big wedding. All our friends and family should come. It needs to be grand." I tried to protest. "But Margaret, that's not what we want." Michael, however, didn't support me. "Mom knows best, Olivia. Let's do what she wants." So the wedding planning began. It was nothing like what I had wanted. The guest list kept growing. Strangers I had never met were invited. The venue was huge, the decorations were extravagant, and everything was over the top. One day, while tasting cakes, I tried to talk to Michael. "This is too much, Michael. This isn't what we wanted." But Michael just shrugged. "It's just one day, Olivia. Let's make everyone happy." The wedding day arrived. I stood in a dressing room, wearing a dress that was too big and too fancy. Sarah was there, trying to cheer me up. "You look beautiful, Olivia." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I just wish this was different." As I walked down the aisle, I saw so many faces, most of which I didn't recognize. The ceremony was a blur. I said, "I do," but my heart was heavy. The reception was even worse. Loud music, too many people, and Margaret hovering around, making sure everything was as she wanted. At one point, I stepped outside for some air. Michael found me. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. "This isn't what I wanted, Michael. This isn't us." Michael took my hand. "I know, Olivia, but it's just one day. We have our whole lives ahead of us." I wanted to believe him, but standing there, surrounded by a celebration that felt more like an ordeal, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake. I loved Michael, but our wedding, something that was supposed to be about us, had turned into something unrecognizable. And that worried me. The days after the wedding were supposed to be happy, but they weren't. Michael and I settled into our new life, but something had changed. And then, Margaret came into the picture in a way I hadn't expected. It was a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there with a suitcase. "Margaret, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" I asked, confused. "Oh dear, I thought Michael told you. I'm staying with you for a while. My house is being renovated," she said, pushing past me. I was stunned. Michael hadn't mentioned anything. I called him at work. "Michael, why didn't you tell me your mom was staying with us?" "Oh, I forgot. It's just for a few weeks, Olivia. It's not a big deal," he said casually. But it was a big deal. Margaret didn't just stay with us. She took over our lives. She had opinions on everything, what we ate, how we cleaned, and especially how we spent our money. One evening, I came home to find Margaret sitting at the kitchen table with our bills spread out in front of her. "What are you doing, Margaret?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm looking at your expenses. You're spending too much. As a family, we need to save," she said, not looking up. I was shocked. "Margaret, these are our personal finances. It's not your place." Margaret finally looked at me. "As your mother-in-law and an elder, it is my place. I'm just trying to help." I wanted to argue, but I knew it wouldn't help. I walked away, feeling frustrated and invaded. The situation got worse. Margaret criticized everything I did. One Saturday, I was making breakfast when she walked into the kitchen. "You're making pancakes? That's too many carbs. You should make something healthier," she said, frowning. I took a deep breath. "Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I can make my own decisions about what I eat." She tutted. "I'm just saying, a wife should take care of her health." I felt my anger rising, but before I could say anything, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother is telling me how to cook now," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Michael looked uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe you should let Olivia do her thing." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Fine, but don't blame me if things go wrong." That night, I tried to talk to Michael. "I can't live like this. Your mother is controlling everything." Michael sighed. "She's just trying to help Olivia. She's old and set in her ways." "But this is our home, Michael. We should make our own decisions," I argued. Michael didn't say anything. He just went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had reached my limit with Margaret's constant meddling and criticism, especially regarding our finances. It was time to take a stand. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, I decided to bring up the subject. "Margaret, I've been thinking," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. "How about we do an experiment? For 1 month, let's keep separate budgets for our expenses. Then we can compare and see who's more efficient with money." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "An experiment? Interesting. You think you can manage better than me?" I nodded. "Yes, I do." Michael looked uneasy. "Olivia, is this necessary?" "Yes, Michael, it is. I think it's a fair challenge," I said firmly. Margaret smiled, almost smugly. "All right, dear. Challenge accepted. So, the battle of budgets began. I kept meticulous records of every penny I spent, making sure to be as efficient as possible. Meanwhile, I noticed Michael sneaking extra cash from the joint account, but I didn't say anything. The month flew by, and soon it was time to compare our expenses. We sat down at the dining table, each with our records. "Let's see what you've got, Olivia," Margaret said, a confident smile on her face. I laid out my documents, showing every transaction and bill. As you can see, I've managed to save quite a bit this month, even with all the regular expenses. Margaret looked over the papers, her smile fading slightly. "Not bad, but let's see what Michael has." Michael cleared his throat. "Well, I didn't spend much, just the usual stuff." I decided it was time to reveal what I knew. "Michael, what about the extra money you took from our joint account?" Michael's face turned red. I needed it for some personal things." I pulled out the bank statements from the joint account. "Here's the proof. Your spending was higher than mine this month." Margaret's face was a mix of surprise and anger. "Michael, you lied? Why?" Michael didn't have an answer. He just looked down, embarrassed. I turned to Margaret. "As you can see, I'm quite capable of managing our finances efficiently." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she looked up, her expression hard. "Fine, you've made your point. But this doesn't change anything. I still believe I know what's best for this family." I let out a sigh. It was a small victory, but I knew the battle was far from over. Margaret's control over our lives was still a problem, and Michael's lack of support was even more concerning. But at least I had proven my point. I was good with numbers, and I knew how to manage money. It was a start, but I knew there were more challenges ahead. The air was tense after the budget challenge. Margaret's attitude towards me hadn't improved, and Michael was still avoiding any confrontation. I knew something had to give, and soon it did, but not in the way I expected. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when Margaret walked in, her expression stern. "Olivia, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. I turned to face her. "Okay, Margaret, what's on your mind?" "It's about your attitude towards money. You're too controlling, too greedy. It's not healthy," she accused. I was taken aback. "Greedy? Margaret, I'm just trying to be responsible with our finances." Margaret shook her head. "No, you're hoarding. You don't want to share. You don't understand what it means to be part of a family." I felt my frustration rising. "That's not true. I work hard for my money, and I think it's fair to want to manage it wisely." Before I could say more, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" "Your wife," Margaret said, turning to him. "She's too obsessed with money. It's not right." Michael looked at me, then at his mother. "Olivia, maybe you should ease up a bit. Mom has a point." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michael, you're taking her side? After all the evidence I showed you?" Michael shrugged. "I just think we should all get along." That was the last straw. I stormed out of the kitchen and went to our home office. I pulled out the documents I had been keeping, proof of all the money Michael had been giving to Margaret without my knowledge. I gathered everything and went back to the kitchen. "Okay, you want to talk about money? Let's talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. I laid out the documents on the table. Bank statements, receipts, everything. "Here's proof of all the money Michael has been giving you, Margaret, most of it from my earnings." Margaret's face turned red. "That's none of your business. He's my son, and he's helping his mother." I looked at Michael. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Michael looked away. "I just wanted to help her." I turned back to Margaret. "And what about the wedding? You wanted a grand affair. Who do you think paid for that? It was me, against my wishes." Margaret was silent, her mouth a tight line. I took a deep breath. I've had enough. This is not how a family should be. I work hard for my money, and I won't be accused of being greedy or controlling for wanting to manage it responsibly. Margaret looked at me, her eyes cold. "So what are you going to do?" I met her gaze. "I'm going to think about what's best for me. This can't go on." With that, I left the room. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and sadness. My marriage was crumbling, and the family I had hoped to be part of was nothing like I had imagined. It was time to make some tough decisions. But for the moment, I just needed some space to think and to breathe. The house felt colder. The walls seemed to echo my thoughts. I spent the next few days mostly in silence, contemplating my next steps. I knew a conversation with Michael was inevitable, and it came sooner than I expected. It was a quiet evening. Michael walked into the living room where I was sitting, a determined look on his face. "We need to talk, Olivia," he said. I nodded. "Yes, we do." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking, and I've made a decision." I waited, my heart pounding. "I want things to go back to how they were. I want to spend my money how I like." "I don't want to argue about it anymore," he said. I looked at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Michael, it's not just about the money. It's about respect, trust, and partnership. We're supposed to be in this together." He shook his head. "I can't live like this, constantly being questioned and judged. So, I'm giving you an ultimatum. Let me spend without restraint, or we get a divorce." His words hit me like a punch. I felt a mix of disbelief and clarity. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "Yes," he said firmly. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Okay, Michael. If that's how you see our marriage, then I agree to the divorce." He seemed taken aback. "You agree? Just like that?" I stood up, feeling a sense of resolve. "Yes, just like that. I won't be part of a marriage where my partner doesn't respect me or our future together. I deserve better." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Olivia, are you sure?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm sure. I want a partner who stands with me, not against me. And clearly, that's not you." Michael didn't say anything more. He just turned and left the room. I sat back down, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The ultimatum was meant to corner me, but instead, it had set me free. The house felt different after Michael left, quiet, empty, but it was a space I was ready to reclaim. I began by reorganizing, rearranging furniture, and redecorating. It was therapeutic, a way of wiping the slate clean. One evening, while sorting through old photographs, my phone rang. It was Sarah, a dear friend I hadn't seen in months. "Olivia, how are you holding up?" Sarah's voice was warm, laced with concern. "I'm managing, Sarah. Just taking it one day at a time," I replied. "I can't believe Michael did that. And his mom?" "I never trusted her," Sarah added. I let out a soft laugh. "You and me both. But it's over now. I'm focusing on what's ahead." "You're so strong, Olivia. Hey, why don't we catch up soon? It's been too long," Sarah suggested. "That sounds perfect. Let's do it," I agreed, feeling a flicker of excitement. We met the next evening at a cozy cafe, a place brimming with memories. Sarah's presence was comforting, a reminder of life beyond my recent troubles. "Olivia, I'm so proud of you. You're handling this like a champ," Sarah said as we sipped our coffee. I shrugged modestly. "I don't have a choice, Sarah. I refuse to let this break me." "You're amazing. Remember, I'm always here if you need anything," she said, squeezing my hand across the table. I smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Sarah. That means the world to me." Life gradually regained its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, found solace in quiet evenings with books, and poured myself into my work. I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. Then one day, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Olivia, I want to apologize. Can we talk?" His voice was unsteady. I hesitated, but answered, "Go ahead, Michael." I was wrong, terribly wrong. Living with my mom, it's impossible. She's never satisfied, and I can't keep up with her demands. I don't have enough money. I need to come back home, Olivia, he pleaded. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "Michael, I accepted your apology, but it changes nothing. We had our time, and it's over now. I've moved on." "Olivia, please, I cut him off. "No, Michael, this is my life, and I'm not going back to how things were. Take care of yourself." Hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had picked up the pieces of my shattered life, and I wasn't about to scatter them again. I was whole, on my own, and that was all I needed. Months had passed since the divorce finalized, and each day felt like a step forward. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was mine, and I cherished every bit of it. My life had taken a turn, but I was in control now, steering it in a direction that felt right. One afternoon, as I sat in my office crunching numbers, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. "Hey Liv, how about dinner tonight? Just the two of us." I smiled and quickly typed a response. "Sounds great, Dad. See you tonight." Dinner with my dad was always special. He was the one who taught me to be strong, independent. We met at our favorite diner, a place that felt like home. As we settled into our booth, Dad looked at me with his kind eyes. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" "I'm good, Dad. Really, I am. It's been tough, but I'm finding my way," I answered honestly. He nodded. "You're strong, Olivia. Always have been. I'm proud of you." We talked about work, about life, about everything and nothing. It was comforting, familiar. Later that week, I was at the grocery store when I bumped into an old acquaintance, Emily. We had lost touch over the years, but seeing her felt like a pleasant surprise. "Olivia, it's been ages. How are you?" Emily greeted me with a warm smile. "Hey, Emily, I'm doing well, thanks. Life's been interesting," I replied with a chuckle. We chatted for a while, catching up on old times. Before parting ways, Emily said, "You seem different, Olivia. More at peace, I guess." I thought for a moment. I guess I am. It took a while, but I'm finally in a good place. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I had reclaimed my life, my space. I indulged in hobbies I had long forgotten, spent time with friends, and found joy in the little things. One evening, as I sat on my porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walked by. She was an elderly lady, always kind and observant. "Good evening, Olivia. You seem happy these days," she remarked, leaning on her walking stick. I smiled at her. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson. Yes, I am happy. It took some time, but I'm there." She nodded approvingly. "Good for you, dear. Happiness is something we all deserve." As she walked away, I sat there, soaking in the calm of the evening. The journey had been long, filled with ups and downs. But as I looked back, I realized that every step, every stumble had led me here. I had lost a husband and a troublesome mother-in-law, but in return, I gained something far more precious, myself. I was complete, just as I was. A calculator in my head, and a heart resilient enough to start anew.